The state can no longer be considered to be the locus of power within global governance. We increasingly see decisions being made at supranational levels and subnational levels of governance. And we also see a variety of non-state actors participating in decision-making within global governance. This raises a key question about the legitimacy of these decision-making processes. I'm interested in what the academic project of global constitutionalism thinks about these new decision-making processes. So what do I mean by global constitutionalism? Global constitutionalism is an umbrella term which encompasses constitutionalist frameworks being used to discuss international law, the international legal system, and more broadly, global governance. Now, of course, constitutionalism can mean many different things, and so we should draw a distinction between three varieties of constitutionalism beyond the state. The first, international constitutionalism, then an international institutional variety of constitutionalism, and then thirdly, a contemporary global constitutionalism. The international constitutionalism model looks at questions of international community and jus cogens norms. The institutional variety is concerned with rereading constitutive documents of international organisations as if they were constitutional documents. A key example of this was the conversation about the UN Charter as a constitution for the international community. Those projects were concerned with questions of the hierarchy of norms. The contemporary global constitution project moves beyond those types of questions and looks at the allocation and the limitation of power. It is much more concerned with questions of accountability, the rule of law, and democratic legitimacy. Whilst it still takes international organisations as its subject and is still very much more concerned with constitutionalism beyond the state, we can see that it's moved towards a more public law style questioning. Within this global constitutionalist model then, what does democracy mean, or what is the role for democracy? Traditionally, within domestic literature, democracy and constitutionalism have been considered to be antithetical. And it is not then surprising that international constitutionalism, which was considered with hierarchy, has not had much to say about democracy. However, there are broader notions of constitutionalism which look to questions of good governance, and they have seen democracy as both important and, in some instances, foundational. Global constitutionalists that build on this thicker or broader notion of constitutionalism have looked at democracy and have indeed in some instances discussed it as a norm or a principle of global constitutionalism. But what does democracy mean for global constitutionalists? We've seen in the European Union constitutional debates and the discussions of global democracy in international relations scholarship that there are a variety of different models and debates about how to move democracy beyond the state. We see conversations about deliberative democracy, participatory democracy, and representative democracy. And underlying these debates is a criticism of a lack of a demos. Indeed, moving democracy beyond the state might need a rethink of the processes that are needed for democracy. But we have to remember that democracy requires a link to people. A federalist model can take into account subnational governance levels, whereas global constitutionalism currently has a tendency to see the state as still as a single entity. Whilst it acknowledges non-state actors, and indeed those non-state actors are important in the decision-making processes, non-state actors such as corporations and non-governmental organisations, the state is still a single entity, and thus not taking into account subnational governance might be moving decision-making too far away from the people. When I look at global constitutionalist scholarship and ask what is meant by democracy, I ask what is meant by the who, what, when, where, and how. Or in other words, the foundational questions of who are the people involved and what are the processes that are being discussed. What we need to remember is that democracy has to be about self-government, and therefore there has to still be a strong link to people. I consider the extent to which democracy becomes merely a process, whether that is elections, voting, participation, or deliberative, and loses the link to the people, and thus loses its meaning as self-government.